So with that, I will turn it over to Sheila, who is just as complex and well-rounded as all of these people on the panel. She is the Dean of Academic Affairs and Director of the Tony Stabile Center for Investigative Journalism, and we're really grateful to have her here moderating the panel tonight. So thank you.
Thank you, Megan, and good evening, everyone. This is the fourth Pulitzer Prize Seminar. Every year, we bring to the Journalism School the winners of the Pulitzer Prizes to talk to our students about the trade, the craft, the challenges, and the opportunities that await them in the brave new world of journalism. I'm very pleased that this year's winners are part of a team of reporters that show the interconnectedness between what is going on around the world and what's going on in this country. So this is our format for today, and I hope you listen closely because I will impose the rules strictly. I will start by presenting each winner in turn. I will give an introduction to each of their prize-winning work. After that, I will ask them a few questions and then invite the audience to ask their questions for like another 5 or 6 minutes. I will then proceed to the next panelist and then to the third. At the very end, there will be one big open forum where you can all ask your questions on any or all of our panelists. So I hope that's okay. This, by the way, this is being recorded and live streamed, so be careful what you ask. It is my pleasure to start with our first prize-winning work that we'll feature tonight, Seafood from Slaves. The men you see in this photo were captives of Thailand's seafood industry. In some cases, they had been held for decades as virtual slaves, risking murder by ship captains if they failed to obey. They were forced to catch or process seafood that then made its way into the supply chains of almost every major American food retailer, and from there to dinner tables worldwide. For decades, slavery at sea has been an open secret, but a team of journalists from the Associated Press brought the issue to worldwide attention because they found captive slaves, countering industry claims that the problems had been solved. Margie Mason and Robin McDowell, two of the members of the AP team with us today, were responsible for finding information about captive slaves. For months, they turned over whatever information they had received from where the slaves were kept. They heard about the remote Indonesian island village of Benjina. When the AP team arrived there, they discovered hundreds of Burmese slaves, some of them caged, others buried in a company cemetery, their graves marked with fake Thai names. Robin and Esther Tusan, a Myanmar journalist who is a correspondent for the AP in Yangon, took a small wooden boat out to a trawler where fishermen pleaded for help. Ordered to leave, the reporters persisted and were chased in a speedboat by angry company officials who threatened to ram them. On the island, the reporters logged the names of ships loaded with slave-caught seafood, then used satellite images like this one to track them. One ship went to a Thai seaport, and so did the reporters. For 4 days, they hid in the back of a small truck, scrunched down behind tinted windows because the area was patrolled by gunmen for the fish mafia. The reporters watched as the seafood was unloaded into trucks, and they followed the trucks to cold storage and processing factories that then shipped the seafood abroad. Despite shoddy documentation and police corruption, the journalists were able to piece together a list of companies selling the tainted cargo. Martha Mendoza, who's then based in San Francisco, she's here with us tonight, connected that cargo to distributors in the United States, using customs records and business databases to identify shipments and dates, cross-check against the types of seafood brought from Benjina. Fearing for the men's lives if they published the story, the AP sought help from the International Organization for Migration, which arranged for the men's rescue. In all, the investigation freed 2,000 slaves, including the man in this picture, Min Nant, who is shown here reunited with his mother in Myanmar. Min Nang had been kept 22 years a slave. For a year-long investigation that used classic shoe leather techniques, as well as modern sleuthing involving analysis of databases and satellite imagery, the Pulitzer Prize's highest honor, the 2016 Public Service Prize, goes to the AP team for Seafood from Slaves. Congratulations, Margie, Martha, and the rest of the team. By the way, if you don't notice, it's a nearly all female team from the AP that investigated this amazing story. And Yanis, I'm sorry to say, you're the lone male on this panel tonight. Maybe Mauricio will come and join you.
Minority. Yeah.
So, Margie, let me ask you first. This story is not new. I mean, The Guardian and others had reported this is not unexplored territory. And there's a lesson here for our students. I mean, how do you go into a story that has been reported already? How do you decide that it is worth delving into a topic like this? And how do you decide how much resources you would invest in it?
I think that's a really good question, and I'm glad that students are here, and even seasoned journalists. So often we come across stories, and Robin and I have been in Asia for a really long time. We were both aware, along with most of the other correspondents working in Asia, that this has been a problem for a really long time. Many people had written stories about men who had escaped and lived to tell their stories. Some other journalists had been able to track some seafood connected to Thailand, but no one had been able to actually find captive slaves and then connect their seafood directly to the United States and very specifically to stores and brands. And so the story began with us when we were working on another story involving the Rohingya, which is a persecuted Muslim minority group in Myanmar that are being shoved out of their country. And in talking with a source of mine, he showed me some data and said, that's a good story on the Rohingya, but maybe you want to take a look at this. We've been seeing a lot of fishermen from Southeast Asian countries like Myanmar popping up, and he assumed that they were just being abandoned in Indonesia. And he said, a lot of this seafood is going to America. And so I then went back to Robin and I said, look, we both know about this. Everyone knows about this, but how can we make people care? And we kind of talked about it a little bit and then hatched this harebrained, crazy, ambitious idea that we were going to try to find captive slaves and we were going to try to connect their fish to the US. And that's what we did, and it was really hard, and we came up empty. Many, many times we thought about giving up, and then we would come across something else that kind of either connected to something earlier that didn't make sense or piqued our interest in something new.
So, Robert, could you pick up the thread of the story from there? So you wanted to find captive slaves, and you had to know where they are. How did you figure it out?
Well, it took about a year almost until we actually found the island of Benjina. We basically went to sources who were labor rights activists, migrant workers, people who human rights workers, and tried to find out what did they know. And I think is so often the case, these groups that were really experts on this topic didn't really talk to each other very much. So we basically went to everyone we could and worked them and talked to them and spent time with them and went online and just kind of gradually, after following a lot of false leads and kind of spinning around, narrowed into this one tiny island in Indonesia.
Right. So it's one thing to know where the island is, to then going there and figuring out what to do. I mean, what did you do next?
Well, even when we knew that the island was there, we didn't know that it was a huge Thai-run fishing complex in Indonesia and that there were actually men still at sea there. We were basically just going to see what we could find. We had a clue from one or two men who had escaped years ago that there were problems there, but we didn't know it was still going on. So at that time, I was in Myanmar, and I got on 3 airplanes and 2 boats and took a 30-hour trip to this island, kind of on a hope that we were really going to hit something. And I was really shocked at what I found, and really the number of men, the fact that there were at that point 6 big trawlers with 20 men each on them, and several large reefer ships that were carrying the fish back to Thailand. And really, it was at a scale that we had not imagined.
Robin, you had help from a Myanmar journalist. Is Esther Tucson here? Yes. Esther, I'd like for you to come up. Esther is a Yangon correspondent for the Associated Press. Esther, can you tell us how you got into this story and your role in this investigation?
Sorry, I'll just stand behind. So when Robin went there to the island of Benjina, she called me one Sunday early morning at 3 o'clock. She called me saying like, Esther, you have to come here, and we need you here. We cannot keep walking on the island without you. So I just flew in the same as Robin. 2.5 days later, I got to the island of Benjina, and that's the background. I was explained about the background of this island by Robin. But then until the next morning, we arrived to the village of this island really late in the night, and it was completely dark, and there was no electricity there, except the other side of the island was completely bright and light and all this electricity. I was so surprised. And as we were going to this like small food store that evening, there were a lot of men also having food. And I started talking to these people with my language, and we were speaking the same language. And that's when we started to be able to talk to a lot of men on the island. Since that evening, we started interviewing all these men on the island, why they got to this island, how come they have to come to this island that is so far remote. This island is so remote that this Indonesians don't even know that this island exists in their country. And it's close to Papua New Guinea, it's close to Australia. And without half a month, they cannot get there, so which means they can never go back. And they started telling us about how they got to the island, how they had trafficked from Myanmar or Burma to Thailand, promised jobs to work in the factories of Thailand, and instead they were given fake documents, Thai fake documents in Thailand, and then they were sold directly to the fishing boats. That's what we found out day after day on the island. And when we see these guys in the cage, that's the time that I went into this company compound across from the village where we were. And I was so surprised that there was a jail in the middle of the company compound, and it is not supposed to be there because it's a company. Then I started asking this man why there's a jail, and they explained it to me that if anyone cannot walk or if anyone requests to go back home, they are locked in that jail. So basically they are in cage with little food or sometimes no food and very poor condition. So Robin and I documented as many fishermen as possible, and all these little things that was really helpful. We started noting the name of the fishing boats, the name of the cargo ships, and then we sent it back to Margie. And Robin would have to climb up, like 6 in the morning, she would have to climb up this hill. On top of the hill, there's no phone towers, cell phone towers, so she needs to go up on top of this hill, and then she would have to talk to Margie, or sometimes even that she cannot talk, so she needs to send SMS to her, and then Margie would by then started to check on the boats.
So Margie, you checked on the boats, and then then what happened next?
Okay, well, at that point, we had achieved goal number one. We had captive slaves. And then, Robin and Esther, and there was also a photographer and a videographer there as well. And so they documented this slave-caught fish being loaded onto this refrigerated cargo ship, this huge ship bound for Thailand where all the fish gets taken to be processed. And so at that point, we had solid documentation. We had a ship with a name. And so then we turned to the satellites. And all these ships have, they have beacons that emit these satellite signals. And so at that point, we were able to I was in Jakarta at the time, and Martha was in California, and so we started watching this little ship as it started moving from Indonesia across the ocean toward Thailand, and we knew it was headed for Samut Sakhon, Thailand, which is a port town just outside of Bangkok. And at that point, we figured out when it was going to get there, and then Robin and I flew from Jakarta, she flew from Burma, and that's when we decided that we needed to follow the trucks. And I always tell this because everybody thinks that this is like in the movies where, we were this, well-oiled machine and we had this whole surveillance thing down. No, it wasn't like that at all. We basically were in this truck and we were crunched up in the back with these tinted windows, and we couldn't get out because we didn't want anybody down there to see us and start asking questions about what we were doing. So for 4 days, and this was like 8-10 hours a day, we were following these trucks all over the city. And our driver was Thai. Well, we don't speak Thai. So the driver at times was tailgating, like right on the bumper, down these little narrow roads in the middle of the night, and we thought, this guy's gonna jump out with a ball bat and just start, beating our car. There were times where we would overtake the truck that we were following. There were times that we actually lost the truck, and we just had to give up and go back and get another truck. One time we were kind of like up, like literally beside the driver. We were like waving at the driver. Fortunately, there were a lot of trucks, so we screwed up a few times, but then we went back and got another truck. And so then what we started to do was we started to get this, these different company names, and a lot of them were really small companies that weren't exporting. And that became, at that point, we called on Martha and we said, please help us, Martha. And Martha is amazing with data and records, and so she was on the other side of the world, and she's digging away, while we're sleeping. She's going through, she's hearing all the tales of us eating McDonald's and not having bathrooms and all this, but she's digging away while we're sleeping at these different companies and starting to piece them together. And it was quite a challenge for her to do that.
I'd like to ask Martha to come up and talk about the next chain in the story. So it's one thing to show that slaves catch seafood. It's another thing to show that that seafood ends up being eaten here and sold in supermarkets here in the United States. How did you do that, Martha?
So now that Margie has defined me as the wonk I am, I'll let you know, as journalists in this community, import records and export records are publicly available. They are usually at pay sites where you have to pay a fee, but many of these sites will work with journalists and provide them for free. Therefore, you can look and see the names of the companies and the dates and the types of shipments going in and out of places. So we just had this list of exporters or potential exporters in Thailand, and we could see where their seafood was going to in the United States, and if it was packaged, what marks were on those packages. Unfortunately, if you go to the market here, what you'll see often is fish with a plastic wrap on it, and it doesn't say product of Thailand or any other handy marks. But some of these marks that we did end up seeing first with the fish and then later with shrimp as well, were Whole Foods and Walmart and Kroger and other ones we were able to connect. Something like Cisco, you know, that huge food distributor. Well, then you can go to Cisco and say, where does your fish end up? And Robin and Esther and Margie and I, throughout all this, kept thinking of all these men stuck on the island. And so even though it was very data-driven, we all were thinking about them all the time and really worried about them.
Thank you. Robin, what impact did this story make, aside from freeing 2,000 slaves? This is nothing to scoff at. Did it change policy? Is it changing the way Thai fishing companies are dealing with their workers?
Well, I think one of the things that we saw, thanks to Martha's work, was she discovered a loophole that allowed for seafood that or seafood that was met a consumptive demand could come in. Slave caught food or products that were coming in to meet consumptive demand could come into the country, and that loophole was closed following the story. There were a dozen arrests. But I would say we had hoped that everyone would jump up and down and say, you know, we're not going to buy this fish anymore, or take really meaningful steps. In a way, we were disappointed that they took a lot of shortcuts, and instead of saying, they would say, you know, okay, Thai Union, which was the main exporter, has cut ties with this particular tiny company or that, you know, cold storage facility. So instead of really pushing, it kind of took baby steps. And so that was a disappointment, but it was a beginning. And I think in a lot of ways, the Pulitzer actually brought bigger attention to the problem, and that it's an ongoing problem, that it's not just Thailand, that there's men all over the world in these kind of conditions that are catching fish that we eat.
I'd like to invite you now to ask some questions. We have microphones at the back. Please identify yourself.
Hi, good evening. My name is Manuel. I'm in the Stabile program. First of all, there's really no words for what you did. I guess that's the pinnacle.
Can you come closer to the microphone, Manuel?
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
First of all, there's really no words to describe what you did. I think it's the pinnacle to what we all aspire to do at some point. When Miss Esther was talking, they were talking about how you got into the island, and what struck me as rather unbelievable is it seems that you just went in, like the door was open, and you could talk to these men, which sounds like something you wouldn't expect. They're being enslaved there. I would think they were being hidden, and the cages would be hidden. So, could you elaborate as to why you think that happened?
So when we imagined this island, the reason why we could go in that easy was that island was so remote and they never had strangers like us. And that was the main thing. And also the same thing, going into the company compound. I was taken by this Burmese fishermen, and they were kind of protecting me in a way that they wanted me to see how the conditions are like where they are. And when we talk about like men in cages, as you walk into this compound, you can just see them, that there are dozens of men in the cage. And you can see that the way they are sleeping, the way they are living there, it's all very horrible conditions. And I would say we are quite lucky that it seems like they are not very familiar with people coming into this island, and that is why we could get this much information as possible. And that's I think we were very lucky.
Thank you.
Other questions? I'd like to ask a question about safety and security. I mean, you were dealing here with what was referred to as the fish mafia, right? So these were people, armed men guarding all of these installations. I mean, how did you prepare yourself? Did you need to go through hostile environment training? Did you take safety precautions? Did you No?
Well, in the case of Indonesia, both Margie and I had worked there for a long time, so we understood the culture, we spoke the language, and knew pretty much how far we could push the envelope, I'd say. Thailand was a little different. We weren't, because we had the language problem, we didn't know the culture and we didn't know the dangers as much. That was a little bit of a dicier situation, I think. But the thing with Indonesia, as Esther was saying, that company was operating for such a long time. That was 10 years, 15 years. They didn't think they were doing anything wrong. They didn't think they were going to get caught out. So it wasn't really until the last few days that they started seeing that we were asking too many questions, that we were obviously not as innocent as they initially thought. So we really could operate pretty freely for the first 4 or 5 days.
Good. We'll circle back to you with more questions at the end of the panel. I'd